So, Psalm 65, for the choir director, a psalm of David, a song. And I titled this one, Glory of Creation. And that's why the songs that I chose were tied into this, because this psalm is very uplifting psalm about where we see in creation, we see the handiwork of God and how it's so blatantly obvious to anyone that will actually look at it and say, you know, there is a creator. Okay, there has to be. There's just no way this just happened. Start off with one of the little things that, of course, is, we might say kind of in the news a lot lately, is, of course, men and women and their differences, or there is no differences. I did a little bit of looking on that. Okay, what makes man and woman different? Researchers find 6,500 genes differ between the sexes. I didn't realize there was that many. And here's a few examples. Men typically have thicker skin and stronger bones. Men have a larger voice box. That's why the Adam's apple. Women's body fat is in their hips and thighs, and men is in their stomachs. Yeah, that's just the way it is, okay? Okay. Women have better senses of smell and taste. Women and men may not respond to a drug in the same way. That was another one I didn't know. Just because you have a particular drug, men and women will generally respond to it differently. And science has kind of caught up with this concept so that they have to adjust things if it's a female or a male. But there's another way that you can tell that's more on the lighter side, and it's the haircut, okay? Here's an example of two women talking about a haircut that illustrates what I'm talking about. And this is from Gary Smalley. Betty, you got a haircut. Oh, it's so cute. Ruth, do you think so? I was sure that my stylist gave me a mirror. I mean, you don't think that it was too fluffy looking? Betty, oh no, it's perfect. I'd love to get my hair cut like that, but I think that my face is too wide. I'm pretty much stuck with this style, I think. Ruth, are you serious? I think your face is adorable, and you could easily get one of those layered cuts. That would look so cute on you. I was actually going to do that, except that I was afraid it was going to accent my long neck. Betty, oh, how that's funny. I would love to have your neck. Anything to take attention away from this 2x4 I have from shoulder line. Ruth, are you kidding? I know women who would love to have your shoulders. Everything drapes down so well on you. I mean, look at my arms. See how short they are. I had your shoulders, I could get clothes to fit me so much easier. Betty, oh, do you really think so? Oh, you're just saying that. Ruth, no, I mean it. Here's the same conversation between two men. Fred, you got a haircut, didn't you? Al, yep. There will be silence before you and praise in Zion, O God. Silence before you. It's like when a crowd is singing, then there is a silent pause because they're so overwhelmed by the awe. See, the silence before God, and tied to the praise, but that silence is part of the praise, because there's times in our lives when we're seeing the handiwork of God and we just have to stop and just be silent and just contemplate on that greatness and that glory. I've had it many times when I'm preparing a message and are studying, and sometimes I have to stop because I can't take it anymore. There's just too much glorious things going on. And I have to just stop because my mind can't take it all in. It's just way too much, too fast. Thankful vows, and to you the vow will be performed. Thankful vows and their fulfillment by the constant repetition of God's providential favors. See, the vows and they're performed, and we constantly see them over and over again. So we're just so thankful and so grateful for what he's done. Verse 2, O you who hear prayer, to you all men come. And I really never thought about this before, and I was reading and I was thinking, oh, you who hear prayer. Do you realize that this actually is one of the attributes of God? The fact that he hears all of our prayers. And to you all men will come. Either one way or another, all men are going to come to you either by love or by fear. One of the two is going to happen. Yeah. Verse 3a, iniquities prevail against me. So I have this even in my own mind, and I understand it, and I see my own sinfulness. And the charges against me are strong. It's kind of like you're being charged with a crime, and the evidence is overwhelming that you actually have committed the crime. This is why we stand in ourselves and we see ourselves against our God. So our iniquities, our sin, they just prevail. They overwhelm us. But then in Genesis 4, 6, and 7, it's an interesting little side note that I ran across. When the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. This is something that part that you must master it, that I found really interesting. This is something that we can look at in our own lives. When we have that sin that's attacking us, that is crouching at the door, it's coming after us, we need to master it. We need to take control. Now, we do it with God's help, but still, we have a responsibility, just like Cain did. Cain, after killing his brother, God came to him and said, that sin is there, and you have to fight against it. You have to take care of it. And God, again, is willing to be the help. Verse 3b, as for our transgressions, you forgive them. Here David is clearly knowing the fact that those sins, that iniquity that's attacking us, the fact that we need to overcome it. And here it is, you forgive us. You forgive them sins. You, O Lord, will provide a way and have provided a way, because it was with your power and your help that we can overcome. Verse 4, how blessed is the one whom you choose and bring near to you, to dwell in your courts. We will be satisfied with the goodness of your house, your holy temple. To be chosen by God, and I'm not going into this election chosen, this is a little bit different than that. To bring near to you, to dwell, we will be satisfied, your house, your holy temple. Now you take this verse all together and you look at what is it teaching us about that relationship. To be invited into the place where God is. So think of that first of all. God invites you to come to where he's at. Then to be invited into his house. So you picture it like you're invited to his estate. Now you're invited into his house. Then you are invited into the very presence of God. So not only into his house, but into the room where he is. To be in his good graces where all of my longings are satisfied. So I'm invited to his estate. I'm invited into his house. I'm invited into the room. And then I'm invited into his company. The Psalm speaks of God's glory as seen in creation. And creation is a big part of the evidence for God. It's known as there's general revelation and special revelation. Those are kind of theological terms. General revelation is creation itself, where it's blatantly obvious to anybody that will be able to see and understand there is a creator. Okay, if there is a creator, we have to know more about who that creator is. And then we have special revelation. Special revelation is the Holy Spirit speaking to us. General revelation takes away the excuse anybody has for saying there is no God. And in Romans 1, verses 18 through 20, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man who suppresses the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. Since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what was made, so that they are without excuse. What has been made, what God created, gives the evidence of who God is. The fact that God made everything, and everything in the way that he made them, to where everything works together. There is so many factors in our world that if you adjusted this a little bit or this a little bit, would be disastrous for the world. I'm not going to go into all this details on that stuff, but God designed everything to work together, and he did it for us. Verse 5, by awesome deeds you answer us in righteousness, O God of our salvation. See, his power and his glory are seen by his deeds. Here again, back to general revelation. His deeds, creation is one. What he did in creation. You who are trusted of all the ends of the earth and of the farthest sea. There is a consistency in creation. There is the movement of the planets around the sun. There is the movement of the moon around the earth. There is all of these things that are taking place at the same time, and every one of them has a purpose. Every one of them demonstrates who God is, how he is a God of order. He also is a God of power, and they're seen everywhere. The sun not only gives light and heat, it also provides light that causes the chemical reaction of life. Plants need three basic things to live: sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. Sunlight is needed to convert carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates and oxygen. Broken down, they release energy in the human body. These things all work together perfectly, and they have to. If you take one of the elements out of it, one of the sequences out of it, everything dies. This didn't just happen by accident. It can't. Verse 6, who established the mountains by his strength, being girded with might. See, the mountains, their size, their location, exactly how they were formed, was all part of what God did. He established these things. It didn't just happen again. It wasn't that the mountains that we have here are here because, well, it's just kind of the way it happened. No, the mountains are placed. Everything on earth has been placed for a reason, for a purpose. We have huge blessing in this nation because we have the Appalachians and the Rockies, and then we have these huge Great Plains in between. Every one of these things has a benefit to the people of this country. And there are many other parts of the world where just because things are laid out the way they are, that they are receiving a benefit. The Rocky Mountains have a huge impact on weather. It's amazing how you can have a storm system coming across. It hits the Rockies and it stops it. The Rockies are so huge compared to the Appalachians. They're much, much bigger. But everything about it, the way that it's designed, is designed perfectly. And this is why also you have, and we'll look at it in a minute, is the water cycle. But verse 7 is interesting because it was talking about the mountains and how they were placed. Verse 7 is not really talking about land. It's talking about people. And it does that in a little unique way. And it's something that you see in the Psalms, where you have a repetitive thing. See, and of course, verse 7 is a repetitive of verse 6. So you have that repetition, but you're looking at something differently. So verse 7, who stills the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves. Now, seas in the Bible very often is used of people. So if you look at that and say, where it says seas, and you see that as people, who stills the roaring of the people, the roaring of the waves. In other words, God is in control not only of all creation, placing everything in order, he's also in control of the people. The people can go so far, and that's it. They can do so much, and that's it. They will be provided for, but also things will be taken away from. Because the roaring of their waves, in other words, they're crying out against God, will lead to nothing. Verse 8, they who dwell at the ends of the earth stand in awe of your signs. You make the dawn and the sunset shout for joy. You stop and think about this for a minute. See, we're so used to looking at the sunset and the sunrise from where we are. Okay? We're really never thinking about the fact that there are people all around the world that are seeing a sunrise and a sunset. And it's different, okay? So they see this awesome power of God on display every morning and every evening, no matter where on the planet you live. Now, you get far enough north, far enough south, and the time between the rising of the sun and the setting might be 6 months, but it still happens.
I like to go.
Okay, you can't paint this picture. And you can't snap the picture even. You try to take a picture of a sunset or a sunrise and you show it to somebody, they're not getting anywhere near the same amount of information that you did get when you're standing there and seeing it yourself. It's amazing how even the camera, as modern cameras, which can take great pictures, cannot give you the reality. It just can't be done because you're seeing all of this at one time, and you're seeing, and it's moving. See, and that's the other thing. It's moving, even though you may sit there and say, oh, look at that. And it's, you're not seeing any movement, but if you sit and look long enough, it changes, and it changes, and it changes, and then it goes away. But you really couldn't put a time frame on it. It just kind of happens, okay? So here again, to see this going on, no matter where you are on this planet, and say that this is part of just the natural reaction of things. No. There is designer behind this. Verse 9. You visit the earth and cause it to overflow. You greatly enrich it. Here again, God's provision is overflowing with loving kindness. The earth we live on has an abundance of resources. There is far greater amount of resources on this planet than what is needed.
And they're not going.
Yeah, and there's, but at the same time, if you remember, after the flood, see, even at creation, God gave Adam and Eve to rule over the earth. After the flood, Noah and his family, his descendants, to rule over. Now, if we look at rule over in the sense in which it was meant, instead of the way people like to think, rule is to forcibly rule, it's kind of like the whole concept of a husband and wife. The wife is to submit to the husband is to rule over the wife, but the husband is to rule over the wife in the same way that Christ rules over the church, in loving kindness. So if our ruling over the environment, the earth, the planet, the resources is done with the concept of loving kindness, the resources that we have are great enough. We don't really need more, and there wouldn't be all the stuff that's done now. But at the same time, God does provide. He provides it in such great abundance. And here again, look at a seed. You take a seed, you plant it in the ground, something grows up, and what is on that plant that grows up but a whole bunch more seeds, right? It's just overwhelming. It's an abundance after an abundance after an abundance. The water cycle, the streams of God is full of water. Water evaporates, it forms into the clouds let loose, the rain comes down, it covers the earth, and it flows back to the sea. Okay, and this cycle continues over and over and over again. But here again, if you look out at the layout of the earth, the design of the earth, all of these things are working together all the time. There is what is known as the Gulf Stream. It's a river that starts in the Gulf of Mexico and goes down and around and up north. It's about 70 miles wide. It's a river in an ocean. And you can actually see it when you get up high enough. You can actually see the different color water, and it's flowing. That, in turn, also contributes to our weather on the entire planet because of that river that is flowing that logically makes no sense. How can a river continue to flow year after year after year inside of an ocean? But it does. Just happened to be there? No. We have a God who created all these things. He made all these things. He sustains all these things.
When he made Yellowstone Park, he knew California was coming.
So what does a seed need to germinate? Let's look at that for a second. Specific seed germination requirements vary depending on the plant species. So they kind of set that aside. But they generally include water, air, temperature, and light. Okay, these are ultimately light. Of course, the seed doesn't have light when it's in the ground, but as soon as it sprouts up, it needs light. All these things are necessary. And all of these are provided in great abundance. But see how it correlates with what people need. People need water, the Holy Spirit. People need air, the breath of life. People need temperature, protection. People need light, the light of the Word of God. We're just like the seed, only different. God provides all of these in abundance. Verse 10, you water its furrows abundantly. You settle its ridges. You soften it with showers. You bless its growth. Here again, God causes the water to come down. And the water, the way the water is done, it is providing the needed source for something to grow. And it's done in such a way, it flows in a certain way. It doesn't just stay in a spot. It moves. Water is constantly moving. Even though it's settling in, it still will continue to move. Verse 11, you have crowned the year with your bounty, and your paths drip with fatness. Wherever he appears, his movements are attended by the rich and fertilizing influence. Picture this in your mind. Okay, you're bringing in the crops in the fall. And you're out in the field, and there's such an abundance, you're loading up a wagon. And as you're loading it up, you're piling it up higher and higher and higher. You're trying to get all of it in, and as you go along, certain plants fall off, certain leaves fall off. And after you look back at where you've been, you see that overabundance of a trail behind you. And your wagon is still full because it was piled so high. You have this overabundance there. Why do you have an overabundance? It's because of God's loving kindness. We have that in every aspect of our life. Verse 12, the pastures of the wilderness drip. The hills gird themselves with rejoicing. And here wilderness is not talking about destitute wilderness. It's talking about a big open area where there is no buildings, no people to speak of. It's just a huge, wide open area. And what's there? It's not barren land. It's God's provision. The pastures. In other words, you have the animals, you have the flocks and the herds that are all out there in this lush green pasture, this overwhelming supply again. And the hills gird themselves with rejoicing. From the hilltop, you can look out and you can see it. You can see these green pastures, and you can see all of these animals grazing out there because you look, and it's, here again, we talked about the sunrise and the sunset and the glory of God in that. Look at the glory of God when you look at a lush green pasture full of animals grazing, being provided for by their Maker. All of God's provision. Verse 13, the meadows are clothed with flocks, and the valleys are covered with green. They shout for joy, yes, they sing. Now you look again over that landscape, and you see the lush green pastures. You see the animals grazing in these pastures. But then you also look over here, and you see the wheat. You ever look over a huge wheat field with a slight breeze and watch the waves move through the wheat field? Okay, and what is it doing? The wheat needs this. It needs it as part of its drying process before it can be harvested. Because if you harvested wheat that's wet, it just rots. It has to get dried first. And you have these, like the one song says, the amber waves of grain. If you've ever seen amber waves of grain, you see that, wow, that is quite a picture again. Okay, all of these things that continue on over and over again we see, and it should help make us stop and think, wow, our God is so wise and so powerful and so good. He does all of these things. He provides all of these things. The greatness of our God can be seen all around us. As you drive home today, look at the hills, the trees, and the wildflowers. Each one is designed in place by God for our benefit. When you look across that field, you see in the ditch, and you see these white flowers popping up here and there. Every single one was placed in a particular spot by God. It didn't just happen. So you wonder, there's a design, there's a pattern here, but it's all helter-skelter. It's not just rows. See, whenever man plants something, he plants it in rows, generally. God doesn't have rows. He has here, 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 and all intertwined with all of these other things, with all of these other plants. So that when it's done, you see something that is, we call it arbitrary, but it's not. Because look across an open field that has the white flowers, the yellow flowers, the blue flowers, and are all placed just so. No bouquet can ever come close to matching it. In the creation order, all the diversity complements each other. This is especially true with man and woman. The strengths and weaknesses of one are made up in the other. All the contrast, all the what appears to be confusion isn't. It's part of the plan, part of God's plan. Because man and woman need each other because they're both lacking in something and the other one makes up for it. So why was Eve called a helper as a counterpart to Adam? Now, King James Version says helpmeet. Okay? That's the term used. So I grew up with that term, but if you look at it, it's actually, counterpart is actually closer to the original word. A counterpart is a counter and part of. It's something that's different, but it's still the same. It's something that's unique, but complements the other. So Eve fulfilled what Adam was lacking. Adam was made perfect, but he was not made complete. See the difference? Eve completed him. This should be our same thing in our marriages, but it also should be our same thing with our God, because he fulfills what we're lacking to make us complete.